Great, so it looks like the majority of our attendees today are residency or fellowship program directors, as well as coordinators. So, and those are the groups that we marketed this, this session most towards. Obviously, everybody is welcome. And a lot of the talks are geared towards programs, program directors and coordinators, but obviously anybody, you know, is welcome to hear what we have to say, and we welcome your input as well. Okay, so for the first couple of minutes, I'm going to talk briefly about our AAN virtual recruitment consensus statement on the 2020-2021 application cycle. As most of you know, this was a topic of discussion. If you were attending our CNPD business meeting, a lot of this was going on back then. Right around that time, the Coalition for Physician Accountability had released some recommendations for programs and institutions recommending a way, you know, to prevent requiring of away rotations, and also to recommend a virtual interview season. And they also recommended some adjustments to the ERAS timeline, which were made. So based on a poll and by emailing our constituents in the CNPD and also our educational coordinator consortium, we surveyed them prior to the CNPD business meeting, and also we did a poll during the CNPD business meeting asking if there was a need for a consensus statement from neurology, and overwhelmingly there was. So near 100% of our constituency wanted to have our group have a specialty specific consensus statement regarding virtual recruitment and recommendations for programs. So as a result of that, we created a virtual recruitment work group, and many of the members of that work group are here on the panel today and are going to help out with the Q&A portion. But basically what we did was we had representatives from graduate education, undergraduate, the CNPD, the CNCD, our clerkship directors and coordinators, and we collaborated to put together recommendations on behalf of our organization. Can go to the next slide. Now, just to remind everybody, these are recommendations and suggestions. So there's nothing punitive about not following. It's voluntary in terms of following these guidelines, but there was widespread consensus amongst programs and institutions to support these recommendations. So I'm going to just go through the bullet points of them. I think probably most of you have seen this document, and you definitely have access to it on the AAN website. I'm going to just briefly review the recommendations though, just so everybody's aware of them. The first group of recommendations are regarding away rotations, that they should not be mandatory. They should be limited to students who cannot get a similar or comparable experience at their home institution. And that programs should also consider engagement in virtual experiences, such as virtual visiting clerkships and other online educational programming. Next slide. The second group of recommendations was regarding virtual recruitment and virtual interviews. And the recommendations to programs were that they commit to online interviews and virtual visits for all applicants, including local students, in place of in-person interviews for the entire recruitment cycle. This is to both minimize health risks from traveling and to provide an equitable platform for applicants and programs. The second recommendation is to create a robust virtual environment and share virtual interview best practices with applicants, faculty, and residents to streamline and optimize the interview experience. And part of what we're doing today in this webinar is to try to help support the creation of this robust virtual environment and to share the virtual best practices. The third recommendation is to actively work to attract and recruit applicants from diverse backgrounds, including traditionally underrepresented groups, to enhance the diversity among neurology trainees. And that's something we're going to discuss as well today in terms of application review and holistic application review. And the last point was to utilize alternative platforms to ensure that all applicants have equal access to participate in virtual recruitment and interviews. And that really is to acknowledge that not everybody may have the same access to online connectivity, and to be flexible in terms of need for converting, for example, a virtual video interaction to a telephone interaction, for example. Next slide. And lastly, just to focus, and this, we put this together a couple months ago, and we have a bit more information now in terms of the USMLE testing and the delays and postponements of those. But in terms of application review, our recommendations were to complete and maintain a holistic review of applications, recognizing that access to different experiences is likely going to vary significantly in normal circumstances, but further more because of the pandemic. The second point was to recognize that a significant proportion of medical students may have completed a clerkship training in a non-traditional environment, or they may have their clerkships delayed altogether. And some may have transitioned to pass-fail grading, and to really have flexibility with our application review in light of that. Also, to have flexibility with the requirement of neurology-specific letters of recommendation for screening, acknowledging that applicants may not have had access to the same rotations that they may have in prior years. Additionally, not requiring a sub-I in neurology prior to initial application, and also to recognize that, for example, with Step 2 CS being postponed altogether for 12 to 18 months, to be aware that there may not be scores available the way that they were last year. And I think probably most of you are aware of the alternate pathway to ECFMG certification in lieu of Step 2 CS. And if you're not aware of those, it can be reviewed on the ECFMG website, or if you have any specific questions about it, please either email me or I can redirect you to kind of learn about the alternative pathway to ECFMG certification for those applicants that cannot complete Step 2 CS. All right, next slide. Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like to continue into the portion of our presentations to provide some helpful information and advice. I've invited two current trainees. So Justine Kerr, who's a neurology applicant this coming year. She's a fourth-year medical student at Tulane. And also Erin Zelkovich, who is currently PGY1 in New York. And so both of them are experts in using social media, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say in terms of what do applicants look for and what's engaging to them, and to learn a little bit more about using social media. So on that note, we'll turn it over to Justine.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Justine Kerr. I am a fourth-year medical student at Tulane University School of Medicine. I have the honor of speaking about the applicant's perspective for the residency application cycle this year. And before I get started, I do want to make a note that any of the accounts that I mention in my presentation are simply used as examples. They're not indicative of my interest in any particular program. All right, next slide. So before COVID, applicants and medical students were already using social media for a variety of reasons. Many of us had professional accounts for the purpose of networking with one another and finding mentorship. One of the great things about Twitter is that it has a really great interface for creating communities within people of the same interest, and also allowing us to engage with one another. Next transition. And with COVID now, we are using it to meet fellow applicants. One of the things that we miss out with this year is the opportunity to make trail friends. And so social media has essentially become our alternative for this. Next transition. And then we're also using it for medical education. In my opinion, we're medical students. At least in my mind, if I'm going to be on social media, why not learn something from it? And the neurology community has been really active and amazing on social media. And they really share and provide a lot of neurology education for trainees online. Next slide. What's important to this year is that we are using social media to learn about residency programs and to find advice for applying. When the announcement was first made that interviews would go virtual, a lot of applicants were worried. I was freaking out. And many of us jumped to Twitter to express our thoughts and concerns. And what happened was we found a community of support and willingness to help from residents and faculty, both within neurology and outside of it from other specialties. And it was really cool to connect with many of your residents and your programs online. And honestly, it really makes me look forward to being a part of this community as a resident. Next slide. And lastly, applicants are using social media just to share our lives and celebrate milestones. That's what social media was for. Next slide. As far as disadvantages to this year go, from an applicant's perspective, I know my school canceled all away rotations before I even had a chance to apply for aways this year. And without things like aways or audition rotations, that makes it really hard for us as applicants to gauge a program environment and express interest in particular programs or areas. And for many, that also means having limited letters of recommendations, as we mentioned earlier, within neurology. And along with that limited in-person interaction, it really results in many applicants possibly needing to apply more broadly. So what we will be relying on this year is the internet and what resources you guys are providing to us online, since we can't go directly to you to get an experience of what your program is like. That means we're going to rely on having updated websites. We'll rely on whatever social media you have, virtual info sessions, any type of Q&A to get to know your program, your faculty, and your residents is going to be really helpful during this year. Next slide. So one of the things that came out of our increased reliance on social media was a need for a centralized resource to share information from residency programs. And that's when this NMatch 2021 Twitter account came about. It was created by another applicant, Adriana Ramirez Rojio. Alvin Singh, Dylan Del Papa, and I are also active contributors to this account. And we share and highlight any information that we consider informative for applicants on here. Next transition. And as you can see, there are many residency programs on Twitter, on social media, and they are tagging us in some of their tweets now, and it makes it very easy for us to see their information and to share and amplify what they want applicants to know about their program. We just hit 1,000 followers, and we do get a lot of feedback from applicants saying that it has been very helpful and integral during this application cycle. Next slide. Additional resources that we have now is the social media document that I created, where we collect information from social media, from your residency programs. We collect informative media posts, and we put it all in this social media document. Next transition. In addition to that, we now have a virtual events calendar and spreadsheet that you all can add to, anyone can add to and add their virtual events. That way it's in one centralized location for applicants to look at. And that way it increases the visibility of your open house, your Q&A, whatever it is that you're planning to do. All of this is also accessible as a link on our Twitter page as well. Next slide. So for an example of how this document can be utilized, There is a section specifically for programs to go through. So it just has some examples, things you can do to get started as far as making your first tweet or making your first Instagram post goes, as well as other resources that we recommend for programs to look through. But if I, for example, were an applicant and I were interested in looking at my home program, Tulane, I could go to this list of programs that are active on social media, and I could go to Tulane. Next transition. And if you clicked on Tulane, it would take you directly to the Instagram and Twitter for Tulane, as well as an informational section about the program director, Dr. Kraker, that came directly from the Instagram page. Next slide. So I'm not going to go over this slide in detail. These are references that are also linked on our document. Additionally, I do want to focus on the bottom left. There's this really great Twitter thread I encourage you all to read by Dr. Ian Fields, who is, I believe, a part of the Urogynecology Fellowship Program at Oregon Health Sciences. And I really thought that they had a great virtual interview season. He really kind of talks about how they managed their interview season and how they made it very personable. And I really appreciated the things that he wrote in that thread. So I really encourage you all to read that at some point. It's like a 5-minute read. Next slide. And with our InMensch account, we really have a good idea of what is most engaging for the people who follow us. Within the past 2 months, we've had an insane amount of growth and a lot of visibility within the neurology community. Next slide. So going back to why applicants are using social media, you can see that our most engaging content is the stuff that's about neurology residency programs, things about medical education, and also advice for applying. Real quick, I do want to focus on the left side where we did a program feature for a neurology residency program. There's a form on our Google Doc that we allow anyone, whether or not you have social media, to fill out, and you can write as little or as much about your residency program as you want on there, and we will feature it on our Twitter account for applicants to see. Next slide. So we love to see your residents. One of the cool things about social media is you have an opportunity to feature them. And this is the opportunity for us to get to know them without coming directly to your program. So things like an Ask Me Anything and AMA allows us to ask your residents about their interests, why they love their program. Next transition. And then you can also do resident spotlights. This one was on Instagram. It was a Q&A interview style post. And from this resident, I learned about why they chose their program. I also learned that they were featured in a Met Opera production and they really like Broadway and they also enjoy hiking. So this is a really cool way to feature your resident in a very personable way. Next transition. And you can do the next one as well. So these last two examples are an example of what we call a day in the life. What I really enjoyed on the bottom right is a Instagram story feature where this program had residents take over the Instagram stories and talk about the day in the life on their inpatient rotation. And what I love is because of the video format, it becomes very authentic, but it's also still very insightful to learn about the residents in the program and what they enjoy. And there's a Q&A feature in Instagram stories where we can ask them questions as well. Next slide. So this is just a view of Instagram from your computer or your phone. The thing about Instagram is it's all picture-based. Pictures are 1,000 words. Instagram was made for this. We want to see what you guys are doing. We want to see your residents. We want you to showcase your city and tell us what you're passionate about and what your program is all about. So I really encourage you to use social media this way to connect with us as applicants. Next slide. And this is my last slide. I encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions about any of the resources that I shared. All of this information can also be found in that social media document. It's linked in the agenda, so you're welcome to visit it there. And thank you again to Dr. Schuyler and the American Academy of Neurology for this invitation to speak to you all today.
Great. Justine, thank you so much. That was so helpful, I think, for programs and faculty and coordinators, because this is not something that we grew up doing, and this is not how we applied to residency. So, so helpful for us to kind of learn how we can best engage our applicants, and it was great advice. So I really appreciate it. I think we're gonna wait till the end for questions, because I do want to get through our speaker list. So I'm gonna turn the floor over to Erin now to talk a little bit more specifically about the hashtag Neuro Twitter network.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone being here tonight. So this all started when a couple of fourth-year medical students actually posted on Twitter. And for me, a person who is pretty good user of Twitter, kind of saw the amazing response, as Justine had mentioned, of so many people within the neurology community coming together and supporting the applicants through this really difficult period of time. That's actually when I reached out to Eric Lawson, who is a PGY4 at Emory. I was like, hey, I have this crazy idea. What if we took all these resources and kind of centralized them within a Twitter database? And that's where we just hit the ground running and created this Neuro Twitter network to both consolidate all of the resources for applicants on Twitter, but also how to teach people, both applicants and faculty and residents, who may not necessarily have used Twitter in the past, to be able to use it during this recruitment season. Next slide. As you can see, thankfully, I was able to reach out to a really diverse group of residents, fellows, and medical students, which I thought was really important, especially having Justine's and her colleagues' inputs, because at the end of the day, this is all for them. It's also for us in learning, but they have the most difficult part about navigating this residency application process without being able to go on site, which, me being a PGY1, I was thankfully recently able to do, and it was definitely a really rewarding experience. So obviously nothing can simulate coming to your program and being on site and learning about all the amazing things they have to offer. But now we're trying to find ways to supplement that and allow applicants to get a glimpse or a view of what your program may have. Next slide. We launched a couple weeks ago, I think at the beginning of August, and these are all the things that we have on our guide. As you guys can see, we actually have how to create a new Twitter account. We have tips on personalizing your Twitter account. We have best practices, so do's and don'ts. We actually just launched our mentoring component for neurology Twitter, as well as Dr. Milligan's case reports on Twitter. And the goal over the next couple months is to keep building this resource as new resources come along. And I know our next project by another applicant will be creating a stroke Twitter specific guide, so that people who are applying into stroke fellowship or interested in stroke within residency would be able to have that as well. Also, big plug, I know Dr. Salas is on the call, but if you really want to find the top people from the student's perspective of who to follow in medical education within neurology, we definitely had our top 10 list of Twitter accounts to follow too. Next slide. We're all data-driven people, so I wanted to include some data about our project. This is actually a couple days old now, so we're up to 473 responses of people who have participated in the neurology Twitter network. As you can see, it's a nice mix of everyone. We've had great support from attendings throughout the country, but also we've had over 100 medical students participate as well, looking for people to follow, looking to be involved, and looking to be part of our neurology community. As well as we did have a survey from people who have used the guide, and about a third of them have been medical students, and this is just one quote that we got from a medical student who didn't use Twitter before, but by utilizing our guide, they were now able to use Twitter as part of their neurology application season. Next slide. So it's really been interesting because I'm a data-driven person myself, and I was thinking, what is the impact this guide is having both on applicants as well as neurology residency programs. So I was able to comb through all the data, and as you guys can see, we've actually seen since COVID about 130% increase in the number of neurology residency Twitter accounts as compared to the previous 7 years. My assumption and my hope working together is that we can continue to increase this over the next couple months to get that to be even higher, to allow all residency programs to be able to showcase all the great things that they offer through the different social media tools that we have. There are many options to consider as a program director. As you can see there, I'm not going to read them to you, but it's not one size fits all. I think that's the most important part. Every program is different and every program has different needs. So using the different tools that we have, hopefully you guys will be able to best represent your program. Next slide. Here are some examples of how different programs do it. And just a disclaimer, when I made these slides, there have been changes since then. So I believe Penn Neurology at the time that I was making the slide only had a program Twitter account. I believe they now have an Instagram account that I'm following as well. So I do need to update that. My home institution, Weill Cornell, actually has a program specific Twitter account, but allows a resident run Instagram account to kind of get both perspectives about our program. Northwestern actually has 2 Twitter accounts. They both have an official program account, but they also have a residency specific account that is run by residents. And Hopkins, I believe, has a Twitter account, but may also have an Instagram now. So I'm not 100% sure, but as you guys can see, different programs are doing different things, and I think that's awesome. I think it really shows the uniqueness of each program. And as I said earlier, not every program will do the same thing, and that's totally okay. Next slide. So now I'm gonna sit here as a PGY1 and try and convince many program directors who are not on Twitter to start using Twitter. And I think there's a lot of great reasons why, and we're gonna go through some of them. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. So it's really important to not only recruit applicants, but it's also really important to highlight what your residents are doing. I know that Mayo Clinic as well is doing a Scholarly Sunday. So that's been something really cool that I've been able to follow. One of my co-residents, Sarah Peralta, had a COVID-related article that she published. And as you guys can see, our residency program was actually able to tweet it out. And that allows applicants to see what residents are doing and how the program is supporting them as well. And as Justine said, you know, as a resident, getting the education is wonderful and it's really important, but what are residents like outside? And I think it's really cool, as you guys can see, examples from Eric Lawson, who's at Emory, as well as Adam, who's at University of Utah. We do have lives outside of residency, and I think a lot of applicants are really interested in learning more about residents in that way. Next slide. Honestly, the coolest thing is how many different programs are working together to really help each other and help the applicants. And Dr. Jones is one of the many facilitators of the program that's going on tomorrow that is allowing applicants to learn more about the application process, which I think is really cool. Also, Dr. Milligan is phenomenal and has actually been doing her neurology morning reports via Twitter, which we're actually collecting as part of our neurology guide database so that all applicants and trainees can have access to that as well. And as Justine mentioned, Neurology Match, which is a new Twitter account that has over 1,000 followers, is a way to get your information out there and out to many applicants as well. Next slide. It's also really great in helping diversity and mentoring initiatives. I know that I first started following Society of Black Neurologists, and then quickly from that, we had Black in Neurology Week, and there's over 15,000 followers within a couple months, which just shows you the sheer power of Twitter that it has and what you can really achieve using it if done effectively. And it also helps with residents and fellows. You know, we all think about Twitter during this application season, but it also allows your residents and fellows to progress and promote themselves and have opportunities that are sometimes more publicly available through Twitter as well. Next slide. Twitter within neurology is not new. Twitter as a tool within the application process, I think, is relatively new. And there are a lot of what ifs that I think are to be determined. And there are a lot of cautions against using neurology on Twitter as part of the application season as well. I'm not going to be reading all of these things for you because we don't have enough time. But I think the biggest question that has yet to be determined, are applicants and their tweets considered part of the application and review process? Will a program director look at a tweet, say, oh, they tweeted that they love my program, does this mean they really want to come here? Or vice versa, if you see an applicant's tweet, does that automatically kind of move them towards the bottom of the pile if you don't really agree with what they said? It's too early to know. Unfortunately, it's going to take a cycle or two to figure out. but this is not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination. I definitely caution programs just because this is both so new for applicants as well as residency programs. I think the biggest pro that there is for Twitter is reaching a large audience very quickly. And I think that if it focuses on what the residency program has to offer, I think it could be a very useful tool for programs. Next slide. Twitter is very easy and simple to set up. You can do it in 5 easy steps, but some institutions will not allow you to have a Twitter. And that's unfortunate, and it's not something we can control. However, your faculty and your residents can create accounts even if your program can't. Next slide. As Justine showed, the analytics on Twitter are really cool. We can go to the next slide, actually. As you can see, all your tweets will actually have number of impressions and number of engagements, and you can actually track to see what the reach of your tweets are, which I think is really cool. Next slide. And this was the one where we actually launched our guide, and we had tremendous support from the entire community, and we were really thankful for that. So over almost 26,000 people saw our tweet about the Neuro Twitter guide, and we had 4,000 people engage with it, and we had almost 200 likes and 160 retweets, which was amazing and beyond anything we could have imagined. And that just goes to show you the power that Twitter can potentially have, which I think is really cool. Next slide. This is new for me too, relatively. I've been doing this for a couple months within this scope. I have a lot of data that I can share with you in your program. If it's something you guys want me to do like a seminar for your residents or faculty or kind of talk about program leadership, I'm more than happy to show additional data or go over and kind of help create one with you. My link or my Twitter account and my email address are there. I'm more than happy to spend half an hour, and with whoever would like to help create the social media from a Twitter perspective. Next slide. Just want to say thank you to the AN and everyone involved in this committee. It's a real pleasure to be here, but I couldn't end this talk without giving shout outs to 2 of my mentors, Dr. Robbins, who has been really instrumental in Twitter, as well as teaching me how to use Twitter, and also Dr. Sapti, who I actually met at the AN in 2018. I've been following on Twitter for 2 years now. And he's amazing at Twitter, and definitely highly recommend following him on that as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, great, thanks. So we're gonna do a quick poll to see how well the Twitter pitch went. And while we do that, I just wanna share with all of you that I'd never used Twitter ever in my life until about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it really is not that bad. For those of you that are freaking out, trying to say, you know, like completely scared of doing it, it's really not that bad. And Justine and Aaron both helped me online with my, you know, figuring out how to repost and retweet. So I'm hoping that we'll try to get, you know, this seems like a really useful resource for our applicants. So hopefully we can, if you're not on there yet, we can help you. Okay, we've got some maybes. All right, that's a lot of yeses and maybes. So I think this potentially is, you know, the platform where it looks like we're going to have a lot of our traffic and a lot of our, you know, a lot of our virtual sharing of programs this year. So awesome. Well, thank you to both Justine and Aaron so much for sharing your insight and wisdom on social media and your perspective. So for the next portion of our talk, I'm going to ask Dr. Flippen and Dr. Spector to each share a little bit of their approach to holistic application review. So Dr. Flippen is program director at UCLA, and I want to welcome him to sharing some advice with us today.
All right. Thank you, Erica. Hello, everyone. It's interesting how quickly you acclimate to this environment and seeing people in little boxes, and it's almost like being there, but not quite. But I'm happy to be here today, and particularly sharing this session with Andrew Spector, a good buddy, and doing some really great work at Duke. So first thing I want to do is, when we're talking about holistic review of applications, that's sort of a loaded term, and unfortunately we're in a season where there are a lot of loaded terms, and so people have all of these ideas that sort of pop up in their heads when talking about holistic review. And maybe you can put my face on instead of the slide, and that way it's something a little better to look at. Okay, so and as I did that, my light went on. So I think one thing to start with is what holistic selection is not. It's not a way of making up for past injustices. That's not what the idea is behind holistic review. It doesn't engender a quota system for people who are underrepresented in medicine. It is not a lowering of standards for applicants. And it doesn't ignore academic metrics. Rather, it seeks to apply those and look at those metrics in the context of what you're looking for in a program. And the concept of holistic review is that it is a selection process for applicants that is aligned with the mission of your program. So what you really need to do as a first step is define who are the people that you want to produce and put into the workforce as neurologists. What's the culture, what are the values that your program has that you want to find people who share those values that are going to be the best fit for your program. Everyone on this screen is at a wonderful place and is getting wonderful training, but each of these places is very unique in its personality. And so the person who is in program A may be a great fit for program A, is a great person, but wouldn't be a great fit for program C. And so that's what this is really getting at, is sort of taking away the crutches that we've had in the past of, how many honors, AOA, class rank, all of those things that are very binary and cut and dried. And yes, you can order people very quickly in that way, but is that really going to be, is that person who may be number one in their class, that may not be the best person for your program because their personality does not fit with the people who typically come to train with you. So really what you want within holistic review, it's a matter of matching the applicant to the characteristics of the program. At UCLA, we don't use cutoffs for step scores. We have people in our program from across the spectrum of step scores. Now, obviously, you want people who can negotiate the hurdle of standardized tests, but just because you are the best at that doesn't necessarily mean that you fit with our program. So we look at the experiences, both at the personal level and at the population level. And what do I mean by that? If you come from a certain ethnic group, you have certain experiences that other people do not have, which will give you things that you can add and share with your colleagues throughout the course of training, that they'll benefit from learning from you, and you'll benefit from being able to share and learn from them also. So both personal and population level experiences. What are their personal attributes? How, demonstration of curiosity. People who have an adventurous spirit. They do a lot of traveling. Lots of volunteer experience that shows maybe a extraordinary sense of altruism. Then we'd also look at the competencies, so looking at the objective data, but how does that fit into the context of that person as a whole? And looking at the competencies that we want or we think are important for residents to be successful in our program. So we take all of that information together in order to evaluate residents, or residency applicants, I should say. there is a sort of a great set of videos on the AAMC website that can take you through a process by which you can first look inward and evaluate and determine what are your most important core values, and then go the next step in designing a matrix in which you will then use to evaluate applicants as you go through your application review, and also develop questions to ask during the interview sessions that will get at those, to draw out those attributes that you're trying to identify in a given candidate, sort of flesh out what those experiences are on a personal level that help to form who this person is that you're talking to. And then from that, at least the step we're at now is refining that process of those application questions, and then a reliable scoring system so that we can come out with a list that sort of ranks applicants based upon their individual attributes and how they mesh with what we're looking for. I know personally for our program, leadership is a big, is a core attribute that we look for in all of our residents. And it's not necessarily leadership in one particular area. We sort of have this reputation of being a hyper research oriented place. But if you look at our residency classes, we actually have people who are across the spectrum, those who are very clearly wedded to being clinicians, and those who are who have a very clear, direct intent of pursuing a clinician scientist career, and then everything in between. Which, you know, for us, it's that leadership. It's leadership in whatever it is you choose to do, not what we want you to do, but whatever you choose to do. And so those have been the sort of guiding principles in allowing us to put together, I think, some classes that are, if you look at our residency cohort, we have people who represent pretty much the entire spectrum of society. And that, I think, for being in the second largest city in the country and one of the most diverse cities in the nation, that helps us to serve our community and our tripartite mission of care, education, and research. So I'll turn it over to Erin. And
Great, thanks so much, Dr. Spector. Here's some of your input on this too.
Sure, and it's always an honor to share the stage with you, Charles. So I'm going to try not to repeat everything that you said, but I agree with so much of it that there may be some overlap in what I say and what you said, just because I think we have very similar philosophies. But when I think of holistic review, I mean the whole application, right? It's not just looking at any one aspect. And so the contrast would be using cutoffs, things like minimum step scores. That would not be holistic. And I would even say a Gestalt review, which is the old way that Duke used to do it, where basically you get an application in front of you, you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but there's no real guidance as to what it is you're looking for or why you might actually be approving or rejecting that application. And you don't know if any of your reviewers are even using the same standards. So a holistic review is sort of a formal way to assess the entire application. And Charles referred to a matrix, and that's the philosophy that we use too. So as you're thinking about reviewing applications, hopefully you've considered things like implicit bias training for your review committees, so that they are trained in what their own biases are and how to identify them and when they're reviewing an application. But no matter what you do to train your committee, the data coming in is still going to be biased. There isn't one aspect of an application where bias doesn't factor in, and a lot of this is racial bias. So USMLE Step 1 scores are known to stratify by race. Grades, especially clinical grades, stratify by race. AOA, again, there are racial biases in AOA, and you can read a lot about that, to the point where Duke recently suspended AOA at our institution because of these concerns. Even opportunities for research, leadership, and being mentored. So if you want a diverse applicant pool, you have to recognize that a lot of the information you're getting could be biased. So it's not just about the bias in the reviewers, it's the bias that's inherent in the application. So the way we combat that is to not rely too heavily on any one aspect of the application. If you're using a step 1 cutoff, then all of the biases that are in that one aspect of the application are going to carry through to your interview pool. So if you want a strong program with a residency class with diverse strengths, you have to give credit for the strengths in each individual person's application. And that's what the holistic review is trying to get at. So at Duke, for example, when we realized that we weren't getting a lot of interviews from underrepresented in neurology groups, I'm talking Black, Hispanic, Hawaiian, Native American, we weren't getting high numbers, and we said, well, why is that? Where are they? Is it a pipeline problem? And it turned out it wasn't a pipeline problem. The applications were there. We were relying so heavily on step 1 that we were actually just excluding these groups. And when we just switched to a racially neutral tactic of the holistic review, those biases disappeared, and all of a sudden our interview pool got markedly more diverse. So what we're doing is we're now giving credit. So your grades are given credit, your leadership activities, your research activities, your personal life experiences, like were you in the military? Did you have to work in a restaurant while you were going through med school? We give credit for all of those things that make you a strong applicant. And no one aspect of the application can control too many points. And then we look at the denominator in the equation. We say, okay, well, maybe you haven't taken step 2 yet. So we remove that, okay? Because we don't want to give someone credit for step 2 because they took it, and then this is in line with these new guidelines, right? We have to be flexible for what was available to each individual applicant. So if your school is pass-fail, well, we don't judge you on grades the way we would judge someone who would get grades. So we change the denominator based on the best score that you as an applicant could potentially get. And then we look at the percentage scores that you got, and we come up with a list that way. And it's been very successful for us, both in diversifying our interviews and our matches. And so I think this is the year, especially on the verge of step 1 going to pass-fail anyway, to really look at the process, analyze your recruitment strategy, look at how you're reviewing the applications. And I think for us, the holistic review was a game changer.
Great, thank you so much to both of you for sharing your insight on holistic review. We're running a little over on time. I'm going to move right into the next section. We have pinch hitting today because I think it's important for us to hear a perspective of someone who's been through virtual recruitment. I have one of my chief residents, Dr. Daniel Assad, who is going to, who just recently went through his fellowship recruitment, all virtual interviews, and have him talk for a couple minutes on what his experience was like, and give us some advice as well.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Skyler, and thank you, Lucy, for inviting me. Just wanted to say again, a very important topic, and I'll quickly mention like 5-6 things. One reason I want to quickly mention is because I'm holding the stroke pager, so I apologize if I have to rush. I just wanted to say that I was in the middle of my fellowship interview when these harrowing times started, and there was a lot of ambivalence, and like my 75% of my interviews got switched, on very short notice to virtual interviews. So kudos to the programs who picked up their game. The first thing is that initially, I was telling Dr. Skyler as well that I thought that there'd be a lot of awkwardness talking to people, through this virtual platform. To be honest, it wasn't. After a couple of minutes or so, it's like you're talking to them in person with these apps and stuff. So things that I found very helpful from programs that I thought that, I wasn't able to visit them, was that number one, programs who gave me at least 5-6 days in advance, sort of an agenda, or who will be my interviewers, which platform they will be using, and the link so I can get ready. Most of them ended up using Zoom or WebEx, but there were some who were using Microsoft Teams and stuff. So obviously the applicants will have to sort of download that program as well. So I think that was very helpful when I knew what I'll be doing. The other thing is, at the start of the interview day, I think there were a couple of programs which I found very helpful was that they ended up having like 15 minutes set for questions about how the interview is going to run. So for one of the programs, I remember they basically walked us through different tabs of Zoom and different things that they will be, you can do with that, and how breakout rooms work and stuff. So that was something that basically really sort of lessened my anxiety. The other thing was that there were two specific sort of formats that I thought that which were kind of helpful. One was that there was one sort of room that the coordinator had, like a virtual room, and then there were separate breakout rooms assigned to each applicant. And the other, which I found, which was very easy to navigate, where you are just connected to the next person who's interviewing you directly. The other thing which I thought was very easy and very, that you log into one virtual room, and whoever is interviewing you, basically the interviewer keeps changing. So there was one set room where the interviewer would interview you, and then they would walk out of the room and somebody else would come in, which is another way, that you can sort of organize your interviews. One thing that I thought that was not helpful, but again, I know it works differently with everyone's schedule, was that we would sometimes get like different links for different meetings, which I thought could be a little confusing sometimes. And that is, again, obviously, that was just my perspective. I do think that before the interview started, there were programs who sent these links either to their YouTube channels or their residency sort of social media accounts and stuff to sort of look into, what the city is like, or what their program is like, or how their hospital looks. So virtual tours was something that really helped me. The other thing was that all interviews actually really, what I really liked was that most of the virtual interviews actually did send in a link for, their equivalent, their fellowship equivalent of a morning report. So they're either their noon conference or their morning report. That really sort of gave you an insight into how, I think that's a good way to look at like how faculty and residents interact as well. And that's another extra piece of information that helped me. And the last thing was, which I'm sure everybody will be doing now, is that there were some programs who left a 30-minute virtual sort of session with residents and fellows, where, as part of the interview, you get to talk to a fellow and talk to them about, like, it's not an interview, you can ask them directly about those questions. So those were some things that really helped me. And I was, to be honest, very impressed, because on spur of the moment, all the programs had to switch to a virtual format in the middle of the application season. So those were my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. It's really helpful to hear that it really isn't that bad doing a virtual interview, and that you can still establish kind of a connection with a person through the screen instead of in person. I know it's not the same, but it sounds like you were able to kind of get a feel, and that's what we're all worried about, the applicants and the program faculty, that we're just not going to get a good feel of what a place is like. But it sounds like you do get some sense of that, so that's really reassuring. So thank you. We can go to the next slide. I can show we had an example of an interview schedule, and this was submitted by one of our coordinators from the consortium, who sent us an example of what she had put together. And I believe she's using Zoom, but I don't think it matters which platform. But this was kind of the idea of putting together sort of different virtual rooms and having, a session to meet with residents in a certain time. I guess some people are doing it the night before to simulate a happy hour or an applicant dinner. Some people are doing it in the morning, or both. So I think there are definitely ways of altering your previous year's syllabi or agendas to kind of modify it so that there's still those same components. So this was just an example I wanted to share that she had emailed us, so I appreciate that. We have some poll questions at the end. So the time went really fast. Hopefully, that was definitely some great content. I'm just gonna mention at the end that for those of you who don't know, there's plenty of AAMC resources. There are a lot for virtual recruitment. They're not neurology specific, but I think they're very helpful. Please check that out. They have a webinar tomorrow where they're going to review their resources. So just wanted to bring your attention to that. Next slide. Also, this is an announcement, and many of you would have received this email. I think today it went out. And this is an opportunity via the AAN Education and Training Opportunities virtual platform since we didn't have a virtual career fair this year at the annual meeting, that this is a way to, for us as programs to upload a virtual platform, a presentation, and that can include audio. And so there's instructions, there's a form, check it out, and hopefully all the programs will be this will be yet another place where there's an opportunity to showcase our programs online. I know that list is getting long, but I think a lot of the content can be similar across platforms, our website, as well as the virtual platform for the AAN, putting stuff on Twitter, putting stuff on Instagram. As long as it's in a combination of all those places, I think people will see it. Next slide. I also wanted to recognize Lucy for helping to put together this webinar and for helping support all of our endeavors in graduate education. And I wanted to also thank our virtual recruitment work group who are listed here, many of which are on the panel and are helping in typing answers in the Q&A. So I wanted to thank you all very much for all of your active participation in our virtual recruitment resources and consensus statement.